جلسة خبراء جديدة، ولكن بعنوان عرض تجارب العالمية للاقتصاد الدائري وتقديم توصيات خاصة بها. الجلسة ستكون عبر زوم. المتحدث الدكتور برسادة موداك، المدير العام لشركة مركز إدارة البيئة المحدودة.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I audible to all of you? Is that okay? All right. I'm going to be sharing my screen and just let me know whether it works all right. Great. I'm going to be talking today on the global experience on circular economy. And when I draw this experience in front of you, having worked in your country, in Egypt, for last several years, I would like to make some recommendations for you to consider. So let's begin first with what do we understand by the term circular economy. There are today more than 150 definitions of this term. But I think to me, the simplest is that it is essentially an economic system aimed to eliminate waste and continually reusing resources, keeping maximum resource recirculation possible and moving away from the traditional linear take, make, dispose model and essentially a regenerative approach. And today, this concept is so critical given the challenges we all have on resource security. The world today is really resource constrained, and the key strategies at how do we be more efficient by reducing waste and emissions in our production processes, but more importantly, to achieve this transformation, how do we come up with newer business models that means harbor innovation and enhance the value creation? So it's something which I would say really need of the day, and many countries across the world, having recognized the importance of circular economy, have started developing their own national circular economy policies and missions. So, if I were to capture what I just said in circular economy, the core concepts are avoid, reuse, reduce, recirculate longer, and recycle. All these four boxes, as you see on this slide, are so we can call them as core concepts of circular economy. There has been a very interesting evolution of this concept. It was the period of 70s and 80s where we realized after the oil crisis that resource efficiency really matters. And when we progress further, the concept of resource efficiency was picked up very interestingly in 1990s in Japan. Of course, we all know 3Rs, but their pioneering Sound Material Society Act got implemented. And in many ways, it really had the foundations of circularity, what we're talking today. But then at a collective level, countries in the European Union came together. They started working on what is called as a waste directive, and that evolved into several comprehensive frameworks thereafter. We'll talk about that as we go along. One of the very significant steps you see taken by China was clean circular economy. Actually, they call this as a cleaner production promotion law, which they enacted. More recently, Government of India started working on circular economy initiatives with 11 line ministries, and more recently, you see more and more dialogues happening at the international level on circular economy. And this whole area of circular financing has come about, which we found now is really making a big difference in transformation. Uh, You know, each time that you find a new wave comes in, you certainly need globalization of that concept, which is commonly understood by everybody. And here you see very recently, last year, we saw emergence of the ISO standards on circular economy. That's something important for us to note, that just shows the maturity the subject has reached globally. So we have ISO 59004, 59010, and 59020. And these standards guide businesses and organizations how to incorporate circularity principles in the functions what they do. This is where I find, in some sense, you can call this as a global acceptance to this subject of circular economy. What we will do now is go, across what's happening in the world in about 6 countries, pan across the world and see how the evolution has happened and how these countries have come about formulating their national policy. I will start with Japan because Japan has been a country where a lot of work has been done, right from the concept, as I said, of the Sound Material Society Act, but then the 3 Rs, which we are very familiar with. But I think the changes what you see since 1993 onwards is more and more legislation, more and more metrics, reporting on to what extent there is a material circularity year on year happening. And I would say the concept of circularity brought to towns or cities, in eco-industrial estates. So we call sometimes the Japanese approach has been very strong apex from the legislation, providing opportunities at the same time ensuring that there is a waste reduction at all stages of the manufacturing. And imagine this country has got really less piece of land. So their interest was to reduce as much possible the waste going to the landfills. And that is how circularity emerged very strongly in Japan. I talked about circular economy in China, and here you see some of the very interesting approaches taken. Just like Japan, you saw here also legislation coming in the early stage on cleaner production and then on circular economy. Generally, the Chinese approach has been to focus first on the waste recycling, uh, working on industrial parks or industrial estate, and at the same time working upstream how to make the promotion of eco-friendly products, use tools such as life cycle assessment as much possible. So the approach has been in that sense very comprehensive. And more recently, there is a huge push Chinese government has taken in bringing in finance, green finance, especially focusing on the small and medium enterprises for modernizing their operations so that the waste is reduced at the source itself and whatever generated gets recycled efficiently. Well, one of the most influencing, I would say, group of nations is the European Union countries. And as I was telling you earlier, that which got announced, looking at the targets till 2050. Then the second circular economy action plan happened, and there then you see the earlier plan got revisited for assessment, and a revised circular economy monitoring framework was introduced. So very comprehensive approach. I think my experience has been working in these countries that innovation is quite a focus. A lot of innovation platforms got created. A huge amount of funding was made available for the innovators to come forward and come up with even newer business models. Focus also is there a lot on product design, not just focusing on the end of life or waste recycling. Because often there is a misnomer that people look at circular economy equivalent to recycling, which I'm sure all of you agree with me that recycling only is one small part. Now, if you move further ahead in terms of another country, small country, but making a very interesting example, that is Singapore. And Singapore came with a zero waste master plan in 2019. And then they enacted something very interesting called Resource Sustainability Act of 2019, and then focus again coming on the innovations. So Singapore has a very interesting focus which they took on electronic waste, packaging waste, and plastics, and it's a more of a waste stream specific approach, and that really got into the master planning process of 2019. Let me take now the example of India, where India started with setting up a resources panel in 2016. The planning agency, which reports directly to the Prime Minister, came with the first strategy on resource efficiency and circular economy. And a national circular economy framework got created, and subsequently Mission Circular Economy, which was then plowed through 11 line ministries. And a huge push came in India on extended producer responsibility, which is working right now on 6 waste streams. So it's very interesting, progressive development, moving from line ministries now gone more on the state level. One of the states in India has now prepared a state level circular economy action plan. But when you look at all these countries and the kind of evolution I was talking about, there are certain common elements which we can't miss. One is each one of them have set up some benchmarking or resource efficiency targets. You see also a lot of effort on public awareness, more and more emphasis on the extended producer responsibility, uh, priority on waste reduction avoidance, a lot of inputs coming in there of materials and technology. And lastly, innovation as the focus, promotion of business models, and appropriate financing is another important element of all these policies across the world. Institutionally, each country designated different ministries. Mostly the ministries of environment have been taken charge. But you also see in China the powerful commission, the National Development and Reform Commission, and the Ministry of Ecology and Environment work together. You have in Singapore, Ministry of Sustainability and Environment. Of course, we all know that in Egypt, Ministry of Environment, and in specific, the Waste Management Regulatory Authority are looking into how do you manage how do you do the sustainable waste management. In the case of EU, it is the European Commission and the national environmental ministries who work in coordination for implementation of all these policies. Many successes, obviously, there are really hundreds of good success stories. But I would focus on 3 examples. The first one at the center is the European Union's eco-design revolution. Eco-design is one of the really overall neglected area globally, and it's very important. I would say that even that's an area missing in many of the national policies downstream. But in EU, you see eco-design evolution. Japan brought the concept of circularity together with the industry and townships. So a lot of industrial symbiosis being talked about. And the large-scale eco-industrial parks in China is an example where they practically are running on the principles of zero waste to landfill. So number of such examples you would see across the world. The challenges, however, despite this progress, has been in terms of policy fragmentation, because you realize that although the ministries of environment in many cases are the custodians, you will still have policies of other line ministries, and sometimes when they intersect, they may not be having any congruence. So that's one challenge. Second is a huge challenge when it comes to data, access to technology. There are also, of course, behavioral change related difficulties. People sometimes don't even segregate waste, even if everybody knows that's important. In the market, again, people are not willing to accept new product designs so easily. misconception I talked about earlier. Circular economy is treated equivalent to waste recycling. But there is also an important element that is adopting to the local context. Because for example, in most of the developing countries, informal sector plays an important role. So the policies must address the interests of the waste pickers, for example. And lastly, there are no many times targeted programs to support financially circular innovations and circular economy, which should be, is many times not tied up with the innovation and accelerator hubs for entrepreneurs. So these are some of the challenges. Now, in that background, I just thought I'll end with talking about what I see happening in Egypt. You, of course, have a very powerful Vision 2030, which talks about key terms like renewable energy, waste management, resource efficiency, and also the vision document talks about the eco-industrial parks or estates. You have waste management law and you have the National Solid Waste Management Program, and there are a lot of international cooperation already happening. One of them, of course, the Egyptian Pollution Abatement Project in 123, forthcoming GSI, which is focusing on climate as well as on circular economy. Several steps taken on enforcement, like ban on single-use plastics, the positive side of promoting ecotourism. So you have actually, in terms of key elements, what we talked of circular economy present differently in the governance in Egypt. Well, three areas I would highlight. One, of course, agriculture, where there's a huge opportunity for recycling and also becoming more climate smart or climate resilient. Plastics, again, a great challenge, of course, the world faces. But here again, there's a good opportunity for, promoting plastic recycling systems to avoid manufacture of virgin plastic, and construction sector, which is hugely growing in Egypt. And how can one mainstream in every construction project green green considerations, low carbon considerations, and how do we do, as you would see in this slide, connect this with sustainable or green finance. I think here I would say there's a considerable traction now happening in Egypt, that sustainable finance is emerging with leadership of the national as well as some of the large commercial banks. And I think that's what will be moving the needle, I would say, on circular economy in Egypt. That's the reason I'm talking about the rise of sustainable and climate finance in Egypt. You do have frameworks, you have already, regulations which are pushing from the Central Bank of Egypt. I would say a lot of good initiatives on disclosures and reporting. I think I would say that many of these sustainable finance instruments, particularly the green bond partnerships between banks and the International Finance Corporation, green bonds, sustainability linked loans, I think all these are going to come together to move the wheel of circular economy. So you have examples in industries. I just cited some of them in Abukir Fertilizers, Frozena, you have Huhtamaki, Oriental Weavers, and lots of cases, and different instruments are getting used to push the agenda on circularity. So I would say it's a very, very opportune movement. Uh, Decarbonization, I would stress, because circular economy and decarb are very closely interrelated. In fact, nearly half of the carbon emissions today can be reduced if we use circular economy approaches. I think this is so relevant for Egypt because you have high energy, difficult to decarbonize sectors. We call them as hard to abate sectors: fertilizer, oil and gas, and cement. And that's where I think circularity will go hand in hand along with the decarbonization related interests. So if I were to just highlight before ending, some of the challenges which we all have to look into. One is the policy coherence. We need more and more private sector participation. I think we also need a solid work to be done for building capacities of professionals as well as those working in finance and that is the banking institutions as well as government. And I think we are already in that process, but I think we have to open up more and more finance to push investments on circular economy. So global experiences, which I was talking about, can help us to develop a policy blueprint. I think it's a good idea to look at frameworks from Japan and European Union. Industrial symbiosis, I think China gives a good lead and interesting examples. And if you look at the urban centric circular economy model, Singapore will be an interesting example for us to follow in the cities like Cairo. So to end my final slide, the suggested roadmap I would put for Egypt, first to come up very quickly on the national circular economy strategy. I would even go ahead and say that Egypt should seriously consider to establish a center of excellence on circular economy, which will help in transition. I would say let's look at extended producer responsibility more seriously and use that as a good instrument, a legal mandate to push material circularity. Let's focus on some of the priority waste sectors, economic sectors, hard to abate sectors to really see more and more circular economy adoption. And as I said earlier, also enable financing. So friends, I'm going to be stopping here, and in the limited time I had, I thought I'll give you quickly what's happening in the world. Exciting things happening today. Egypt is, of course, aligned to what you see happening in the world. But I think what Egypt, to me, should consider is how to leverage on this experience quickly, and be more opportunistic, and look at circular economy as something very transformational, bringing in resilience to the economy currently in Egypt. Thank you very much once again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Brasada.